Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the main event.
You know, whenever we talk about government contracts, people immediately picture one of two things. It's either the cutting-edge sci-fi fighter jet or it's the $600 hammer.
Right. The legend of the $600 hammer.
Exactly. It's the ultimate symbol of waste. But I was reading through the new FY26 National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, and it feels like the Pentagon is finally admitting something quietly revolutionary. They're basically saying, maybe the rules we wrote to stop the $600 hammer are actually costing us way more than the hammer ever did.
That is a fascinating way to frame it. And honestly, you're not wrong. We are looking at a massive shift in the regulatory landscape with this new bill. Specifically, we're talking about the raising of the dollar thresholds for CAS and TINA.
Okay, stop right there. CAS and TINA. It sounds like a bad 80 Seconds pop duo. Break that down for us before we dive in.
Fair enough. TINA is the Truth in Negotiations Act, and CAS is Cost Accounting Standards. These are the twin pillars of government oversight. For decades, these have been the gatekeepers. If you wanted a contract over a certain dollar amount, TINA meant you had to open your books and prove your pricing was fair and reasonable by showing certified cost data. CAS meant you had to organize your entire internal accounting system exactly the way the government wanted it.
Which sounds great for the taxpayer, right? We want to know we aren't getting ripped off.
In theory, yes. But in practice, it's a nightmare. Imagine you're a nimble tech startup in Silicon Valley. You've got the best AI drone software on the planet. The Department of Defense wants it. But then they tell you, hey, to sell this to us, you need to overhaul your entire financial infrastructure to match regulations written in the 1,970 seconds.
And the startup just says, no thanks. I'll sell to the commercial market.
Exactly. And that's the crisis the FY26 NDAA is trying to solve. By raising the dollar thresholds, the amount of money a contract has to be worth before these rules kick in Congress is trying to lower the drawbridge. They are trying to say, come in, we won't make you hire an army of accountants just to sell us a battery.
So let's talk numbers, because raising thresholds can mean a lot of things. Are we talking a slight adjustment for inflation? Or is this a real structural change?
It's significant. We're seeing a push to move these thresholds up considerably. For TINA, the threshold had been stuck at $2 million for a while. Raising that means a massive chunk of mid-sized contracts suddenly don't require that certified cost data anymore. And for CAS, which is even more burdensome, raising the trigger point means you can win much larger contracts without having to fundamentally change how your business counts its pennies.
But isn't there a risk there? I mean, I have to play devil's advocate. If we stop asking for the receipts on these multi-million-dollar deals, aren't we just opening the door for contractors to pad their margins?
That is the eternal tension. It's the pendulum swing. Look, for the last 20 years, the pendulum was stuck on compliance. We were so terrified of fraud that we accepted inefficiency. But the geopolitical landscape has changed. We aren't just fighting insurgents in the desert anymore, we're in a great power competition where speed is the currency.
Speed over perfect accounting.
Precisely. Think about it this way. If it takes the DoD 3 years to negotiate a contract because they're haggling over TINA compliance, by the time that technology hits the field, it's obsolete. What's the cost of that? What's the cost of fielding 2022 technology in 2026 because the paperwork took too long?
That's a heavy question. It's almost philosophical, the hidden cost of bureaucracy.
It is. And the inflation argument is the other piece of this. We've had significant inflation over the last few years. A $2 million contract today isn't what a $2 million contract was 10 years ago. If you don't adjust the thresholds, you're accidentally regulating smaller and smaller deals. You're catching minnows in a net designed for whales.
So, this FY26 update is really just a reality check?
It's a reality check, but it's also a signal. It's a signal to the commercial sector. The government knows it has an innovation problem. They know that the best tech isn't coming from the traditional defense primes, the Lockheeds and Raytheons anymore. It's coming from commercial labs, and those commercial labs are allergic to CAS.
Allergic to CAS. I like that. It sounds like a medical condition.
It essentially is. It can kill a business. Compliance costs are overhead. If you have to hire 5 people just to manage government compliance, that raises your rates. So ironically, the regulations designed to keep prices down often drive prices up because the overhead gets baked into the contract.
That is the irony of ironies. We pay more to ensure we aren't paying too much.
Bingo. So, by raising the thresholds, the hope is that we get more competition. If more companies bid, because the barrier to entry is lower, competition drives the price down naturally, rather than regulation forcing it down artificially.
Okay, but let's dig a little deeper into the mechanics. When we say raising the threshold, does this apply to everyone? Or are there still carve-outs? Because nothing in government is ever simple.
You're right to be skeptical. It's never a blanket free for all. Even with higher thresholds, you still have the concept of commercial items. If you're selling something that is truly off the shelf, you are usually exempt anyway. But the grey area, and this is where the battle is fought, is for modified commercial items, things that are mostly commercial but tweaked for the military.
Like a standard truck that's been up-armored?
Exactly. Under the old rules, that modification might trigger TINA if it cost enough. With higher thresholds, there's more breathing room. The contractor can say, "Look, this is still basically a commercial deal, and the value is under the new cap, so let's skip the audit and sign the paper."
I can hear the sighs of relief from contract officers everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just the companies that hate TINA and CAS. The government contracting officers, the KOs, they're overworked. They don't want to spend 6 months auditing a proposal if they don't have to. They want to get the gear to the warfighter. This empowers them to move faster.
But let's look at the dark side for a second. We mentioned the risk of overpaying. Is there a risk of losing visibility into the supply chain? If we aren't auditing the books, do we lose track of where the money is actually going?
That is the valid fear, and I think we'll see the Inspector General's office watching this like a hawk. If we see a sudden spike in defective pricing cases, or if we find out 5 years from now that we paid 500% markup on a generator, there will be a backlash. The pendulum will swing back.
It always does, doesn't it?
It does. But right now, the calculation is that the risk of losing technological superiority is greater than the risk of overpaying by 10%. It's a strategic gamble.
I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, the barrier to entry. Do you think this will actually work? Will we actually see the Googles or the smaller AI startups suddenly deciding to bid on defense contracts just because the TINA threshold went up? Or is the culture clash still too big?
That's the million-dollar question. Or maybe the billion-dollar question. Raising the threshold removes the financial friction, but it doesn't remove the cultural friction. You still have issues with intellectual property rights, security clearances, the slow pace of decision-making.
Right. Just because I don't have to show you my receipts doesn't mean I want to wait 2 years for you to decide if you want the product.
Exactly. But it's a prerequisite. You couldn't even start the conversation before. Now you can. I think where we will see the biggest impact isn't necessarily the giants like Google. They have the cash to handle compliance if they wanted to. The big impact will be on the mid-tier companies, the ones who are just graduating from small business status.
The valley of death companies.
Yes. In government contracting, there's this valley of death where you're too big for the small business set-asides, but too small to afford the compliance infrastructure of a giant prime. That's where innovation goes to die. Raising the CAS threshold is a lifeline for those companies. It lets them grow larger before the heavy regulatory hammer comes down.
That makes a lot of sense. It extends the runway.
It does, and frankly, it aligns the US system more with how the rest of the world operates. Most commercial markets don't function on cost plus pricing. They function on market pricing. If I buy a car, I don't ask Ford how much the steel cost them. I look at the price of the Toyota and decide which is better value.
We're trying to teach the Pentagon to shop like a normal human being.
Laughs. That is a Herculean task, but yes, that is the essence of it. Moving away from cost-based thinking toward value-based thinking.
So, looking at the FY26 NDAA as a whole, beyond just these thresholds, does this signal a permanent shift? Or is this just a temporary patch?
I think it signals a permanent shift in intent, but the execution will be messy. We have an entire generation of acquisition workforce trained to follow the old rules. You can change the law in December, but it takes years to change the behavior of the person signing the contract. They might still ask for the data out of habit or out of fear of being audited themselves.
Nobody ever got fired for asking for more documentation.
Exactly. Culture eats policy for breakfast. So the law is changing, which is huge. But the implementation guidance that comes out afterward, how the DoD actually instructs its officers to use these new freedoms, that will determine if this is a revolution or just a footnote.
It's interesting to think about the secondary effects, too. If it becomes easier to contract, do we see more mergers and acquisitions? Does it become easier for a big prime to buy a small tech firm because integrating their accounting systems won't be such a headache?
That is a very sharp insight. Yes, M&A activity in the defense sector is often chilled by compliance integration. If you buy a commercial company, you usually have to contaminate them with your heavy CAS systems. If the thresholds are higher, you might be able to keep them operating as a separate, lighter commercial unit for longer. It could definitely grease the wheels for consolidation.
Which brings us back to competition. Consolidation usually hurts competition, so we're solving one problem and potentially creating another.
Welcome to government contracting. It's a hydraulic system. You push down here, it pops up there. But I do think the net positive here is undeniable. We are in a race for technological dominance. We cannot win that race with an accounting book from 1975.
It really does feel like we're watching a dinosaur try to learn how to sprint.
And it has to, because the predators chasing it are sprinting.
So, for the listeners out there, maybe they run a mid-sized engineering firm. Or maybe they're just taxpayers, wondering where their money goes. What should they be watching for as this FY26 NDAA rolls out?
Watch the rulemaking process. The law passes, but then the FAR Council, the Federal Acquisition Regulatory Council, has to rewrite the actual rulebook. That's where the details get hammered out. If they interpret the threshold strictly, or if they add new loopholes to keep the oversight, the impact gets diluted.
And watch the first big scandal.
Chuckles. Sad but true. Watch for the first story about a contractor gouging the government on a contract that was just under the new threshold. How Congress reacts to that will tell us if they have the stomach for this new approach.
It requires a certain tolerance for ambiguity that Washington isn't known for.
It requires trusting the market. And trusting the market is scary when it's public money. But the alternative, trusting the process to the point of paralysis, is no longer an option.
It brings up a deeper point about trust in general. We've built a system based on zero trust, verify everything, audit every penny. Moving to this higher threshold implies a shift toward trust but verify. Or maybe even trust until you give us a reason not to.
That's the mature approach. In a high-trust environment, transaction costs go down, speed goes up. In a low-trust environment, everything is slow and expensive. We are trying to buy our way back into a high-trust environment.
Let's wrap this up with a forward-looking thought. We're in FY26 in this scenario. If this works, what does the defense industrial base look like in 2030?
In the best-case scenario, in 2030, the defense industrial base isn't a separate walled garden anymore. It's just the industrial base. You have companies that sell to Amazon and the Army on the same day, using the same accounting system with minimal friction. The line between commercial and defense blurs.
And the worst case?
Worst case? We raise the thresholds, prices go up, we get less equipment for more money, and 5 years from now we slam the thresholds back down and add 3 more layers of oversight to apologize for it.
The pendulum swings back.
Harder and faster.
Well, let's hope for the blurred lines and the high speed. It feels like a necessary gamble.
It's the only move left on the board.
A special thank you to MarketUS.com for furnishing us this information. You can reach them at MarketUS.com or call them at 954-636-3232. Before we go, this deep dive was created by the MarketUS.com team. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. It's right below the subscribe link.